Welcome to episode 3 of Subtext with Shahril Hamdan, where I reflect on some topics, develop some thoughts on paper, and then essentially read an audio essay. Today I explore our obsession with political saviors, what they might say about us, and wonder what the appropriate response should be. Do we have an obsession with political saviors? Do we obsess over our favorite politicians and hope that if only he or she became prime minister, things would magically be better? I think some of us do. Of course, I recognize there is also the opposite tendency that maybe some others have of almost automatically loathing politicians. But I'm presently more interested in the first tendency, what you might call this savior impulse or savior reflux. Let me explain why. Instinctively, I think there are enough examples of how politicians compromise a lot, out of choice or necessity, depending on your persuasion, that ought to give us a clue that this hero worshipping might be a fool's errand. And more broadly, at our current stage of development, I don't think it's healthy or productive. I'd argue it distracts from the more important debate that we should have around the substance of politics itself, not just of policy questions of which there are so many to resolve, but as I hinted above, of political culture and values and the structure in which politicians operate. Sure, if you're lucky, changing the faces may help for a bit, but reforming the system is what makes change resilient. What should we do about money politics? About incentives and disincentives that govern the politicians' behavior? About concentration of power in government and in political parties? Surely it's more worthwhile to think about fixing the system instead of fixing to get this or that guy in office. At the risk of sounding self-satisfied, part of me feels this whole personality obsession is, in today's parlance, cope. A shortcut for some of us to feel engaged and invested in politics while sidestepping those harder questions about structure, systemic flaws, or our own complicity in it. We focus on the players, the people, so that we don't have to tackle the thing or the game itself. But if I'm honest, this interest could also be my own subconscious working in the background. Because if I refuse to be so basic as to understand the world through the actions of heroes and saviors, that moral and intellectual snobbery sits alongside another part of me that definitely at some point or another placed hope in singular individuals. Heck, worse, I'm sure there was a time when I thought I could be that heroic individual. So the more I sit with this, the more I realize this exercise could also be about me grappling with my own complicated relationship with this savior impulse and the whiff of sentimentalism that often comes with it. As always with these things, it's never absolute. You know this thing that happens when you have a thought and then suddenly you see it everywhere. I think I've got a bit of that now. Whether it's PMX's defenders, or Najib loyalists, KJ romantics, Joe Ghani to save UMNO, Rafizi to fix reformasi, this savior impulse that I'm talking about has been hard to miss for me. If you trawl through comment sections, at least the ones I see, you'll notice a keen interest in forecasting and hoping who the next PM should be, or in some cases, who the next party president should be. As I'm writing this, I'm looking at some comments from my earlier Instagram reels when I spoke about Syed Saddiq in a recent Keluar Sekejap episode. Future PM, insyaAllah. SS akan menjadi PM satu hari nanti. KJ dan Syed Saddiq bakal PM yang patut diketengahkan. And some comments when I was talking about Johari Ghani vis-a-vis his new appointment as MITI Minister. Johari Ghani, next PM. Sanusi, TPM, Malaysia can be great again. Johari Ghani, future Prime Minister. I could go on and on, but you get the picture. And I'd wager you've seen these remarks too, even if you didn't give them much further thought. In fact, sometimes even I, presently a glorified pundit with a job in investments and selling perfumes on the side, get branded a future Prime Minister. I promise you, this is not a humble brag. Of course, seeing comments like that can be a bit gratifying for a fleeting moment before I realize it genuinely is bizarre. I have not even been an MP, never mind proven to be a good leader of a ministry. Nor am I of the Amir Hamzah, Tengku Zafrul mold, having led GLCs or large banks. Whatever my own self-belief, or whatever might happen tomorrow, there's objectively very little in the public domain to support why a stranger today should hold firm a belief that I would make a good national leader, much less a PM. I'm then forced to assume they might have been impressed seeing me give some rousing speech when I was in politics, or an interview on some program or podcast sounding half intelligent, like most politicians do when they're no longer politicians. Again, objectively, these are hardly reliable indicators that I would be a good leader of anything approaching national importance. And I'm not even in the game, right? Yet this label future PM is bandied about. I think my example is instructive of the magnitude of this Saviour reflux or Saviour reflex. And you could say the desperation of people to just grab onto some hope in the shape of a person they don't actually know much about. The next time you're on the social media page of an actual active politician with a decent following, look for the inevitable comment. A viral clip putting down an opponent with semi-impressive BM, future PM. A photo with good lighting, sitting on the veranda of a kampung house, future PM. Giving a speech at some international youth conference, future PM. The point isn't about who deserves to have this comment said of them. Obviously, some are more realistic candidates than others. The point is that we have so many of these comments at all, and that it occupies so much of how we think of politics. I was a guest on a different podcast recently, and was asked who I hope the next PM should be in the next 5 years. I defaulted to the answer you probably guess. But then I went home, and I thought to myself, why that question? Why not another question? Like, what do you hope will change in the next 5 years or 10 years, without it necessarily being tied to a person? Of course, I'm not at all criticizing the host who posed the question. The lament is of the zeitgeist that made the asking and my answering seem so inevitable. So, what are we to do with this? As I've made quite plain, I'm not a massive fan of this Saviour reflux. But that doesn't mean I don't want to understand it. As I intimated earlier, maybe it's part of understanding myself too. If anything, it's even more important to make sense of a phenomenon one wants to change or weaken. Even more important to appreciate what it might be telling us about society or about the anxieties or pathologies of the age. Because maybe those are the things that need to be reckoned with or redirected in a more productive fashion if we are to tackle the observable phenomenon itself. So what is it telling us? I suggest first, it signals the pseudo-feudal hangover that still underpins the relationship between the two categories of leaders and citizens, at least for some. I touched on this in the last episode about Najib, but the contention here is that this complex is a far more general one, especially in the Malay community, governing a certain willing patronage of leaders. Willing being the operative term here, because it's one thing to suggest people are dependent on their leaders as a matter of material necessity, that the dynamic owes to some materialist foundation, where reliance is defined by a core economic or some such need. But I don't think that's the whole story. To be in some sense a willing participant of a patron-constituent dynamic suggests something a bit more rooted in the conception of government itself, that even amongst those who ostensibly possess a high degree of economic independence, aka have enough money not to depend on any YB, contained within the way some of us understand power, the way some of us understand authority and the bargain made with the class of people who possess them, is the expectation that they should be more than merely highly functioning bureaucrats in a well-oiled machine. They should be, in some way, some visceral way, personally inspirational, personally dependable, the embodiment of charismatic paternalism, if you will. Or put even more simply, they are supposed to be the fix to my problem. In the moment, the politician is not merely a representative of politics, he is politics. So I suggest again, the pseudo-feudalism here is not about material dependence. It's more subtle, it's more insidious even. It is about the way authority is imagined and emotionally invested in. And the culmination, you could argue, the logical conclusion of this conception of government and of power is that the solution to the largest social and national issues should also be found first and foremostly not in substantive engagement with such issues that may potentiate legislation or concrete interventions, but embodied in persons or the person, the saviour. If you allow a detour, a side note, in the spirit of curiosity and my own self-awareness of having been both insider and outsider to the very thing I am theorizing, when some of us mock, I think sanctimoniously, in public or in private, the action of YBs putting up huge banners with their faces during celebrations, or why everything from the kurma given out during Ramadan to face masks during COVID to some random plastic chairs at a communal dewan always seem to have the politician's name or the politician's face on it, I wonder if we're in some way in danger of making a category mistake and failing to appreciate the structural meaning others might attach to seemingly individual and self-indulgent acts. After all, isn't society always in flux, both vectors of the modern and traditional, of yesterday and tomorrow, existing in the same space, often in the same household, sometimes in the same person? That's why there's disagreement, there's grief about these signals. Whether it's those seemingly frivolous examples I gave about plastering YB's faces, to the value apparently still placed in printing datukship titles on wedding invites, which by the way I was guilty of, and why they continue existing despite the mockery on some corners of X or threads. Because there remains genuine social currency to these acts. Part of being socially alert in Malaysia is to realize that we often assign wildly different meanings to the same thing. So even if we're engaged in some project of reconstituting the balance, and to be clear I am, no surprise about what I think about pseudo-feudalism, there's still value in recognizing the dualism and acknowledging the constituent imperatives on their own terms. Anyway, back to the main analysis offered. Alongside this long shadow of an antiquated artifact, like an age-old psychocultural peculiarity that we can't quite shake off, the pseudo-feudalism, I think the saviour impulse is equally reflecting something all the more current and modern. A new world addiction to a particular kind of performance and optics in politics that is played on vertical screen with ever-increasing immediacy and velocity. Admittedly, politics, especially democratic politics, has always contained the element of performance at the heart of it. But I think there's something quite novel about the current age, the attention economy we live in, where there is simultaneously boundless content and ever shorter time to process them. And we're not even talking about AI content yet, affecting how we consume politics and our relationship with the personalities in it. We've all heard a version of the saying, attention is the most valuable currency. And yet, capturing attention in this kind of hyper-competitive, free-for-all market, where the gatekeepers of old are weakened to the point of irrelevance, no broadsheets, no 8 p.m. news watched by every household to tell people what to think, is a contest of who can best understand and act on a series of logics and signals. What gets the clicks, and what kind of clicks translate to influence and power? It's like I put it, a logic, an economy, onto itself, which I feel can be distilled to a central operating philosophy. That politics is spectacle. Politics is spectacle. A successful politics now, more than ever, needs to be striking, as do the people in it. The more spectacular, the more theatrical, the better. Virality is not to be found in reasoned, lengthy conversations or expositions of any topic, or patient strategy leading to grand resilient outcomes. Such things no longer fit the bandwidth of attention, nor meet the heightened frequency of what we would today consider news. Instead, virality is to be found in things like the put-down of the opponent, the incendiary remark that generates online reaction, the alpha aesthetic, alpha politics. For others who may be less inclined to that kind of vibe, maybe virality is to be found in videos of the relatable politician doing retail politics through a believable pose, generating a feeling of parasocial intimacy and authenticity. Authenticity. It should be obvious now that even that word doesn't mean what it used to mean, now that it's unironically become a noun to assess an image, a product, a performance. It's like the ultimate oxymoron. Perhaps less lamentably, virality could be found in the celebrity couple, and we know who we're thinking about here, and we're happy for them. For yet others, it is to be found in the photo or the well-edited clip of a prime minister looking prime ministerial, looking inspirational, or a clip of a young upstart sounding articulate in a 45-second video. In the best productions, there will always be a touch of the melodramatic too, mimicking a narrative arc that is imagined and then played out in real life. But across all these different expressions, one constant is this: the spectacle is never faceless. Personalities are always at the center of it. Furthermore, when you consider that content is relentless, one swipe after another, and that the algorithm will tend to feed your confirmation bias, is it at all surprising that one of the results is to generate a strong sense of confidence in personalities known only through the screen, and often not from anything tangible that they do, but more how they make us feel? Politics as affects, politics as vibes, politics as spectacle. There's another constant here, which is about the speed with which the spectacle needs to keep reproducing, to feed the hunger, sustain the facade that is ultimately built on performativity and thin ice. Hence, the ratcheting up of the rate of output, as it were, and the temptation to outdo the last performance. The performance of power, the performance of influence, the performance of inspiration, rather than necessarily genuine power, influence, or inspiration themselves. So the modern digital machinery that feeds this beast of a condition can also take away the Saviour prize as quickly as it helps crown it. I mean, how many times have we seen previously adored figures become despised or cancelled? I suppose the rapid cycle of disgruntlement is a feature of our times, from football managers to politicians. Although occasionally they can be reimagined and recycled as saviours again, albeit in fewer people's minds. The way I imagined the old days was that disillusionment took a while to set in, but now we might cycle through Saviour found and Saviour failed in 18 months. I detect a curious convergence though. The disposability actually reinforces the Saviour complex. Because the new heroes fail so fast, built as they are on hype rather than structure, we immediately start hunting for the next one. I wonder if it creates an addiction to the search almost. We treat leaders like fast fashion, discarding the old and looking for the new trend, never really stopping to ask what ought to be an obvious question: why the operating system keeps breaking the operator. And so I want to end by returning to the object of my grumble, which is that we should focus on the operating system. And yet, as what I've written suggests, the impulse for something simpler is strong. So many will still get drawn to heroes, even for the supposed anti-elite, anti-establishment politics for which the apparent default posture is to treat all politicians with disdain. One could argue the issue there is not so much the frame, but with the faces. If the quote-unquote correct saviour were to come along, they would obsess over him or her too. So if alongside that concession that people will always look for heroes, I were to sketch a somewhat hopeful compromise, perhaps the practical answer isn't to reject the saviour impulse altogether, but to hack it. Because if we can't stop looking for heroes, could we at least upgrade what we demand of them in a very specific way? What could that mean? It could mean something as simple as this: to stop cheering for the saviour who promises to be the solution and instead start cheering for the one who promises to build the solution, theoretically only once. Where we reserve our adulation not for the leader who says, "I alone can fix it," but for the one who says, "I'm going to fix the machine so that anyone can run it." And of course, that's what he says lah. I know this might sound naive, might sound reaching, even pompous. But I guess what I'm trying to suggest is that this marries the emotional need we seem to have for a leader with our intellectual need for a system. It means allowing ourselves to be inspired by a personality, provided that personality is obsessed with something bigger than themselves. Now, does this person exist? I leave it to you to judge. On the one hand, it would require ignoring quite a lot of what I've seen about politics and about human motivations. But on the other hand, it's a suitably Malaysian compromise. Admittedly, I haven't fleshed out the response as much as I've thought about the problem, about how strong the saviour impulse is. But it's currently how I'm squaring my circle. How are you squaring yours? You've been listening to episode 3 of Subtext with Shahril Hamdan, written and read by me, produced by Faye Ilyas and Nadine Nurzuhdi. Get in touch through the comments section or write an email address to be found in the show notes. See you next time.